Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? How many of you came in just from last night and enjoyed the parties? How many of you are female entrepreneurs? That's awesome. Well, we are so excited, and I am personally very excited to be moderating this awesome panel that the future of business is female. And I just would like to say it's about time we're having this conversation and talking about it. And we have such an incredible group up here, but before I introduce everyone, really quickly, we're going to preview a video from the Case Foundation on Faces of Founders. And Faces of Founders is a campaign seeking to build financial, inspirational, and social capital for entrepreneurs, especially inclusive entrepreneurs and female entrepreneurs who are driving innovation and job growth. Too often, we see stories about only men that have created awesome companies, and here they're focusing on women who have created awesome companies. So I'm gonna let that get started, and then we'll introduce our panel.
Hey, look at me. Me.
We're still here.
Me.
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 What do you see?
I see a founder.
I'm not just a woman,
An immigrant.
An African American.
First generation.
Asian American,
LGBTQ.
I am a passionate
Problem-solving.
self-starter.
I see the courage.
To break the rules.
Break new ground.
Break the glass ceiling.
break the glass ceiling.
Break the mold.
And bring about the next breakthrough innovation.
The next breakthrough innovation
That has made America, well,
The most successful startup.
The most successful startup yet.
The future of our story
Depends on all of us.
So if we rethink the way we do business,
In who we mentor.
finance, encourage.
educate,
we can change the way we
see entrepreneurs.
Because this is the land of opportunity.
Because this is the land of opportunity.
This is a nation built by men
And women.
Who didn't just look.
They saw things differently.
And you can too.
So let's seize this opportunity.
Together.
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 Because it's not just good for me,
For our economy.
our communities.
It's good for all of us.
All of us.
All of us.
we're entrepreneurs.
we're entrepreneurs.
And we're ready to get to work. Are you?
And this is precisely why we're here. So starting from my right, I'm gonna introduce our panelists really quickly, and then we're gonna have a conversation. Please be ready for questions, and I'm sure all of you will have questions. The one thing I will say is we wanna bring a mic to you because we wanna record your questions. So if you don't mind just waiting for a mic when we do start with questions, that would be fantastic. So to my right is Cindy Whitehead. For those of you who have not met her before, she is always dressed in pink, but she's an incredible entrepreneur, health advocate, serial entrepreneur who has a 22-year career history in healthcare. And in the last 10 has started and sold 2 businesses for more than $1.5 billion. Cindy now runs the Pink Ceiling, which she invests in female-led and focused brands and companies and movements to have profound impact in the world around us. So please welcome Cindy.
Thanks for having me.
To her left is Jennifer Stybel. She is the executive director of Rent the Runway Foundation. How many have heard of Rent the Runway? And the foundation's signature program is Project Entrepreneur, which was launched in 2015 with a founding partner with UBS. And they aim to increase the number of women building high-growth companies through a digital hub, multi-city events, and a venture competition, as well as a 5-week accelerator program. So please welcome Jennifer. And to her left and my right is the amazing Stephanie Lampkin, founder of Blendoor, a hiring technology that reduces unconscious bias by hiding data that's not relevant and highlighting data that is. In other words, technology that allows the ability of humans to judge others based on their qualifications, not just molds. And she's a 14-year career in the tech industry, has founded 2 startups, and has worked in big companies such as Lockheed Martin, Microsoft, and TripAdvisor, just to name a few. Please welcome Stephanie. And my name is Sonal Shah. I'm the executive director at the Beck Center of Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown University and a board member of the Case Foundation and the family foundation of tech pioneers Gene and Steve Case, who founded AOL. How many of you remember AOL? Oh, yeah. And they are extraordinarily focused on entrepreneurship and especially inclusive entrepreneurship, which is what we will be talking about today. So, Stephanie, I'm going to start with you. And, you know, we're going to start with, I think, a short video about you where you pitched to Tech Entrepreneur, to Entrepreneur Magazine, and talk a little bit about what it took to get through that. And I know you're going to tell us a little story about it, but let us start with the video because I think it'll tell the story, and then it'll help you with your comments that are going to come up. So can we do the video really quickly on Stephanie? Sorry, I didn't mean to call you Stephanie.
People suck at judging other people. Yes, even you judging me right now are subject to unconscious bias. Studies have shown that 2 identical resumes can be sent out with just a name change from Emily to Greg and yield a 2x difference in response rate. So we built a platform that hides candidate name, photo, and age from recruiters while showing that candidate's fit score based on skills, education, and experience, and simultaneously measuring how objective hiring managers are in their people decision-making processes to mitigate unconscious bias. We have 57 enterprise customers on the platform and a waiting list of over 450. So we're raising a $1.5 million seed round so that we can grow our sales, operations, and engineering team to build a technology that drives better people decisions based on merit, not mold.
I really don't think that this is in our bailiwick, and I don't believe in the model at all.
Me neither. I would send her down, but that's
Yeah, I wouldn't want to waste her time. I don't think it's fair.
I know you guys are prejudgmental. I'm not. But I seriously, as a businessman, would like to know how much revenue she has before I shut off an opportunity of learning when I promised you I just want a couple minutes of her time.
I think this is interesting. I'm willing to spend 5 minutes. And you know,
I just don't want to set the expense we're going to spend a minute.
If we start off by,
I promise you.
I think we'd be clear,
Thank you,
clear
guys.
about that up front.
All right, let's
Okay?
open the door.
Fascinating. Stephanie, tell us a little bit about that and what your views are once you see that.
Yeah, so you know, it's interesting that I'm building a company focused on mitigating unconscious bias, and then the process of raising money to really launch and scale that business, I come up against a lot of the same bias, and I'm trying to use technology to surface. And so probably one of the biggest lessons I realize in fundraising, as you can see, is oftentimes your allies and advocates are from people that you wouldn't expect, and people that you would expect to be fully behind you in full support are still very suspicious because we all have bias, right? It's not just men, it's not just you know, people who are straight, it's inherent in all of us. And so it really was empowering for me. I acknowledge that it's tough, but that I'm solving a really important problem. And so, you know, the difficulties of being rejected are hard, but was able to bounce back and make the most of it.
Can you just quickly, can you give us a little bit about why you started Blendoor? Like what focused you on that bias?
Yeah, so it was, my aha moment sort of happened about mid-stage in my career, because I've been coding for a while. I started coding at 13, took advantage of this nonprofit called Black Data Processing Associates, AP Computer Science in high school, got into Stanford, Microsoft, MIT for grad school, and about 6 months after, I interviewed for an analytical lead position at Google. And I thought it went really well, made it to the final rounds, but they came back and said, you're not quite technical enough, but we're gonna hang on to your resume in case some more sales or marketing position opens up. And I later found out that out of 55,000 employees, Google only had 12 African-American women in technical roles. 12. And the common narrative was that it was a pipeline problem. Oh, we just can't find people. It's like, well, shit, I guess I need a Caltech PhD just to get any type of job at Google. And so I took my non-technical self and built the first version of the app and promoted it right around the time that companies were looking for solutions around how to diversify their workforces.
Wow. Jennifer, at Rent the Runway Foundation and through Project Entrepreneur, you really focus on providing women access to the tools, the training, the networks to build scalable businesses. And tell us a little about the organization, what motivated, and how you're building high-growth companies.
Sure. So the foundation was created by Jen Hyman and Jenny Fleiss, the co-founders of Rent the Runway, and they would often go to gatherings of high-growth entrepreneurs and noticing they were the only women at the table. So this really was a way for them to give back and provide a lot of the support that they had gotten when they were building their business. And through data, we're seeing women are actually starting companies at a faster rate than ever, 2.5 times the national average, but still less than 10% of high-growth companies are founded by women. So how do we get beyond the women building small businesses, single-person proprietorships, and get them to succeed at building the billion-dollar companies, the companies that are going to IPO and really change the world? So how do we shift that thinking when they're still early stage?
Yeah, and Cindy, I think you have faced this,
Yes.
right? In terms of building a high-growth company and someone believing that you can build a high-growth company. You went into it, you're a health entrepreneur. You've exited.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what is it you've learned both in running your business, selling your business, and then now investing in women?
Well, I'll tell you, when you say pharmaceutical CEO who sold their last company for $1 billion, I bet you didn't expect me to appear here. You certainly didn't see me coming in blazing pink, and I was up against that. I think no question. I had a particular moment in the course of the company where I had a golden opportunity. We were private, and I was invited to the biggest healthcare conference of the year, the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. I had 8 minutes to present. And I got in front of this room. This is my big moment. This is where you look for future partnerships and you put yourselves on people's radar. And I get up to talk about the drug that I got approved was dubbed by the media as female Viagra. I got to talk about women and sex. And here I am in blazing pink, and the whole room started to giggle. And when it started to giggle, I thought, I'm watching my clock count down. So I can remember I reached over and I fast-forwarded my slides as fast as I could to get to brain scan studies that showed a fundamental biological difference in women with this medical condition. And I put it up and I pointed. And I waited just long enough for it to be uncomfortable for everybody in the room. And I said, are you looking at what I'm looking at? Because I'm just here to talk about the biology of sex for women. But it was a really important moment and lesson for me in terms of how I was going to have to bring focus quickly, how I was going to talk about it differently. And so, that was it's an anecdote, but the bigger story, I think, is that no question being unexpected in the room is going to foster a level of underestimation. And I think that you can do two things when you're underestimated. You can either be frustrated by it, rail against it. You can let it creep in. I guess there's three things for self-doubt. Or you can use it as an invitation to surprise people. And that's really what I talk to so many of the female founders I invest in today is, look, it is what it is. Here's what it is. Here's what you can expect. Now, how are you going to manage that? And I think that I have an incredible group of women who kill with competence. So.
And to both you and Stephanie, Stephanie, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. To both you and Jennifer, tell me a little bit about how is it that when women are pitching, when they're going into rooms, what is it that they're facing, and then what do you tell them? And Jennifer, from your perspective, when you see these pitches, what are you seeing that's important to recognize? So I'll start with you first, Cindy, and then go to Jennifer.
Well, I think what they can expect to see is a table who probably won't relate. And we know by the data that actually given an identical pitch, so identical, I don't deviate by a word, if a guy gives it, he's going to get funding 68% of the time. If a woman gives it, it's 32% of the time. And when they tease out what is that, like what's at play, what was interesting is they started looking at what the follow-up questions were. And so the questions for men were all framed around how are you going to succeed? And the questions for women are how are you going to prevent failure? And I think that really exposes, this sort of belief system we have of who's going to get it done. And so I think my recommendation going into the room is two things. One, if you're pitching a product that probably they don't have experience with, or if you're pitching the first libido drug for women to a room full of guys, I think it's a fair ask to say, get women in the room. Like, I think that's a fair ask. If I'm going to come to the table with you, I need you to have people who can relate in the room. And I think that the second piece of it is when those questions come, and they're prevention-oriented questions instead of promotion-oriented questions, flip them.
Yeah.
I think of it as there are two kind of major barriers for women when it comes to pitching businesses. One is external and one is internal. The external one is having more women at the table, whether they are the actual investors or just providing the perspective of the customer. Jen and Jenny often talk about when they were initially pitching Rent the Runway, they would be in rooms with all men and they would say, well, let me go home and ask my wife. Now, the wife of a VC is not the target customer, so they were really at a disadvantage, not to mention that if a typical pitch is, let's say, 5 minutes, it takes them half of that time just to explain the need before they're actually getting into the actual business, whereas if the man understands the business right away, they get all of that time for the pitch. So I agree with Cindy that there really need to be women at that table, whether or not they are ultimately the investor. Now, the internal piece is confidence. And there was just a piece in The Economist talking about how men are more likely to be overconfident than women. Now, I think we all see this in practice, but when it comes to pitching, what that means is men come in with the attitude of, and I won't use generalizations, more men come in with the attitude of, this is a game-changing idea, this is going to be huge, and I'm the one to get it there. The women come in with realistic expectations of what they expect to do revenue-wise. So either women need more hubris, or investors need a better bullshit detector, or a little bit of both, probably is really the answer. So having that overconfidence and really putting forth your big idea and being able to articulate the ultimate vision, even if you're not totally sure how you'll get there.
Yeah. And Stephanie, I know you're seeing all this bias no matter what, wherever, which is why you
whether
created
women are present or not.
Yeah. And you saw it with women who had a different type of bias. And the second is, let's be clear, it's much harder for African American women to raise money than it is just for women to raise money. So tell us a little bit about what your experience has been in raising money, and what are some of the challenges? Your first 100,000 came from Pipeline Angels, which is a network of women investors and social entrepreneurs who invest in specifically diverse enterprises.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent we're all subject to like-me bias. And the more that I can see success in you, the more I can trust you to, grow my money 10x. And oftentimes it's a matter of just sort of what we've seen happen, in the past. We haven't seen an African-American woman grow and scale a company to yield a 10x return for an institutional investor. And so when I come into the room, I always tell people I would probably be more likely to get to raising $1 million if I were a nonprofit looking to raise for a charitable cause, because we've seen Black women do that, then I would be asking for an investment to grow the business. So in many ways, it's very much as she described. I do see being underestimated as an opportunity, right? If you don't see, me really succeeding in any kind of way in this domain, then I have a lot of room to surprise and to opportunity to succeed. So my focus is less on oh, woe is me, I'm an African-American woman trying to raise, I think there's less than 20 black women that have ever raised $1 million or more in venture capital. And more just how can I take advantage of this, right? I think it's sort of a natural selection in that, okay, you don't see the value in me. Chances are you're not the type of investor I want to go on this journey with. And with that sort of attitude, I'm just empowered to keep moving and just really be excited about the people that I'm going to make rich.
Yeah, that's great. And Cindy, that's such an interesting point that Stephanie makes, but I think one of the things that we were talking about in advance was also what kinds of questions do women get asked versus men in pitch competitions? That you were talking about this a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's those prevention questions. It's things that are geared toward, at their heart, I think they convey an assumption that she doesn't have the moxie to get it done, to take it across the finish line. And I think it's a factor of how many have they seen do it. And it's why it's so important, I think, what we do to storytell those successes, to prop them up. It really does make a difference because it's then attainable in their eyes. So I think that, I was asked a number of odd questions, but the nature of my business is such that I probably would be. I probably more often than not had men say, female Viagra, I'm female Viagra, to which I would say, if I had a nickel for every one of you who said that, I wouldn't have to sell the company for $1 billion. So that's... I mean, that's an N of one in an unusual circumstance. But it's really telling what those questions are, and that's why my advice to all of the female entrepreneurs in the room is just have that on your radar. Like, the study's there, we know the language patterns are different, you're in the moment, you're nervous, you're pitching, but when you get those questions, if those questions feel oriented that way, turn them. And be that promotion aspect. I loved the point that Jennifer made. I'm sorry, I'm just going to piggyback on it in terms of how men will walk in the room and they'll present the big picture idea. They've already taken it to the finish line and they're telling you, I'm going there. And I think women, and it's actually a wonderful trait of female entrepreneurs, that they have a pretty explicit plan on how they're going to get there. But when they walk in the room, they start to tell you the plan of how they're going to get there instead of teeing up. And this is the dream to where I'm going to take you. This is Stephanie. This is where I'm going to make you really rich. I think starting with that and then backing up into the plan will in fact be a differentiator, because a lot of times, and I have wonderful men I invest in too, but a lot of times I'll tease them. They'll say the big idea. I'm like, how are you going to get there? Like, I'm going to get there. So if I ask a female, how are you going to get there? She's like, all right, this is my 3-month plan, 6 months. And I think that's an asset.
Yeah, please
frame
go ahead
it first.
So one of the questions that always pops up in my mind in these forums is, when we're talking about women, is how critical are we of the rubrics that we're using to measure women versus what we've traditionally used to define a successful man, because I think about this idea of a high-scale, high-growth company, right? But the wealthiest the youngest billionaire we have right now is the founder of Spanx. And I'm sure when she went into pitch this cutoff control top, no one was like, oh, this is a high growth, high scale, we're gonna build an app kind of company. Yeah. But she's become uber successful. And so even though I am in tech and I'm building something that's really scalable, I wonder, in your experiences, to what extent do you push women to sort of conform to the masculine ideal of what a startup founder should look like? And to what extent do you try to change the minds of investors to say, hey, there may be opportunities here that you can't see because your mind is trained to identify characteristics that are traditionally masculine?
Well, with Sarah Blakely in particular, she probably wouldn't be a billionaire if she had raised, right? She bootstrapped that company with $5,000 of her own money, and that is a really valid way to grow a business. And that can be a model. Not everyone has to go VC. Not every business is the right fit for VC. So that's another thing to remember, that there are multiple ways to get to scale.
Oh, I would say not everyone should go VC. And I think, finding a different path. I raised money in an unconventional way because I wasn't likely to get traditional venture money, which was really unheard of in pharma, which is very capital intensive. It takes a lot of money to get there. But because that wasn't going to be my path, I found my way to angels, to family offices, to those who would also be very mission aligned with me, and it paid off in a big way because I had a hard road many setbacks, and thank goodness they were in it with me along the way. I think to your question about like the male model of, talking to female founders about conforming to it, absolutely not. Absolutely not, because that would say to us that, in my advice to them was absolutely not. It would say there isn't something actually very special that women bring into the room, that they bring into the boardroom, that they bring into the C-suite. I think that, that empathy-driven decision-making, that it's very data, but, through the lens of an empathetic eye, I think is going to be fundamental to future leadership.
So you have raised so many different questions, so I'm going to pick on one as a start and then keep going. So your last point was what kind of money to take. Stephanie raised it to, how do you think about this? Like, do you take venture capital? Because if somebody offers it to you, do you take it? Or what do? Do you wait till the right investor comes in? How do you all approach this, and how do you think about that for yourselves?
The first step is understanding the landscape and really understanding all of the different options that are out there. So for our Project Entrepreneur events, we always kick off with a discussion around the different paths to funding, and whether it's angel, whether it's VC, whether it's bootstrapping, so that people really understand the options and then can think about what is the right path, or maybe there are a couple options they want to consider, but just going with the one that gets the most press coverage isn't necessarily the right answer for every business.
Cindy, talk a little bit about yours,
Yeah.
and then you sold a company, and then you brought the rights back.
I did. So I'll say in terms of funding with venture, it has almost become the definition of success. Yay, I got funding. That's when terror should begin. Abject terror, because you have to pay it back and then some. And I think that you've got to be, my biggest failure in starting my first business was that desperation for capital to scale, and I took money from the wrong person. And I took money from a group, and we could not, the ink wasn't dry before we departed in terms of our philosophy of the future of the business, how we would treat people, compensate people. And it really did have the capacity, I think, to put me under. But it was a lesson hard learned. And it really means a lot who you bring into your investor base. Whatever form it is, angel, VC, you're going to be married to these people for a good long time. So you better choose wisely. You forget, often in the moments of entrepreneurship where you really need that money to go to the next level, you forget that you're choosing too. So that's really important. So Sonal's mentioned, I sold the company, and I had a wonderful outcome, a great outcome for our shareholders, a win scientifically, and it was the dream realized. And yet, lo and behold, there wasn't a $1 billion happy ending. I sold my company, and then the company that acquired it, who had all the means to march it across the globe to make it broadly, affordably accessible for women, went through their own turmoil, and it went on the shelf. And it was heartbreaking for all of us who had seen this all the way through. So having my personality, I started maybe nipping at them, saying, wait a minute, what's going on? And had written a contract in which there were really important performance obligations for what they needed to do with the drug. That was a lesson learned from Company One, too, I can talk about. But because they were not meeting them, it gave me a basis of a lawsuit, and ultimately I now have the product back for nothing. Thank you. It's going to be a fun year.
Yeah, well, we're going to come back to that. Stephanie, tell us a little bit about what it's like to pitch in Silicon Valley and what you've learned, and then kind of how you're thinking about investors in your own company.
Yeah, so pitching in Silicon Valley is, I would say, very unique actually than pitching in LA or New York. Most of my investors are not based in Silicon Valley. And again, because it's a really interesting homogenous network of people. And they very much have these sort of prototype ideas of what a successful founder looks like. And there's a lot of pattern matching. And so what you'll see happen is, even if you sit on a pitch, it's like buzzword bingo. It's like, yeah, Bitcoin and AI and machine learning and, and it's no, as much as glamorous as they try to portray it, it really is just a lot of followers, a lot of continuation of what we've seen in the previous dot-com bubble. And so what I've learned is it is valuable because investors get a lot of pitches from a lot of companies, oftentimes in similar spaces, and so they can give you feedback and insights about, well, you know, some of your competitors are doing this or that, and help you sort of refine your pitch, et cetera. And a lot of investors will say no, but still sort of bring you in to their network where a lot of deals happen. A lot of deals happen, you know, in these bars and restaurants and miscellaneous battery club, et cetera. And so that was a really good lesson learned. But for me, I really pivoted my strategy around fundraising after pitching a lot in the Valley, realizing that I needed to focus a little bit more on people whose like vision and motivation and goals were very much aligned with mine. Some smart money, like we just got accepted into SAP's accelerator, who's really, really passionate about doing things with data that are smart and inclusive. And so moving forward, I'm actually no longer pitching to VCs. I get emails and I tell them, sorry, thank you, I'll send you an update email, but we're sort of moving forward in a different direction. And, you know, and I did bootstrap for a while. I wanted to talk a little bit about that. It's really tough. Yeah. I slept on couches for a year, didn't get on a plane for a year, which if you know me is like unheard of. And it's very humbling. So, you know, you oftentimes have to take 2 steps back just to get a few steps forward. But I think in the end, it will pay off. It's not for everyone, but if you can do it, I would recommend, you know, working out the kinks, getting to know your customer and your product before going straight to money. And I can talk more offline if folks want to learn more about bootstrapping.
Right.
Oh, no, we will talk about that. You know, listening to all of you, what's fascinating is 50% of the population is women.
Yeah.
And it's hard to believe and understand that a market of women selling products to, if entrepreneurs are selling products that are solving a problem, women must have problems. We all do. Why is that not a market? Why is that such a hard market to sell?
Worse, why is it called a niche market?
Yes.
I'll take half the population as my target, right? As my addressable market. It's incredible that we think that. I think that is confounding, particularly on the basis of the outcomes data.
Yeah.
You know, we know that when there's diversity of thought, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, you get to better outcomes. I don't know that I have that answer. It's a great mystery to me. I like to say, you know, when I'm teasing, I think well-intended men who are traditional VCs, I like to say, hi, I like money. Do you like money? Great. How many of you, the founders that you invested in are female? Do you know the outcomes data? And it's an eye-opening, you know, it's sort of with humor, couching the what in the hell is going on?
Yeah.
I actually don't find it that surprising, given the history of our country.
Yeah.
So white women just got the right to vote less than 100 years ago, as a black woman just a generation ago. And for many years, we've been complacent with men building and selling us products without our input. And I think until there's some sort of major economic shift, and like what we see even what happened with the war, like men go to war and then women come into the factories, and that was sort of our introduction into these organizations. And I think in order for that shift to happen, it has to be another sort of major economic event or, you know, sustained evidence that women can create companies that yield significant return.
There was just a great article that said, and I thought this really told the story. It said, there was a moment in a shift where power shifted from the blue or gray suit, the sort of Ivy League blue or gray suit, to the dropout in a hoodie, and it's about to shift again to women. And it's such a great piece, and I think it is so true because of the skill sets that women are bringing to the table in a world that is increasingly being managed by the spreadsheet. And with all respect for data, I'm totally data-driven, having come out of the sciences, and yet it's that ability to connect and to problem solve and see data through the lens of empathy that I think will make the best leaders of the future. So I think it will shift.
And there's data saying that women are controlling more money, both from building their own businesses, but also inheriting wealth and living longer. So that actually is happening, and so hopefully that will have the impact that we anticipate.
And the shift is happening, so a lot more women have more access to capital and are starting to make investments. Jennifer, what are some of the best methods you've seen to increase female entrepreneurs' access to capital?
So part of it is building that network, because we routinely hear from investors that they never invest in someone that they're meeting for the first time, and they might not even take meetings from people that don't have a soft intro. So developing those networks so that you know the investors before you're asking them for money, before you need something from them. Just developing those authentic relationships, because then you have that network to draw from. That's one. The other is improving the pitch, understanding what the investors are really looking for, being able to put forth your big idea and articulate it in a way that will capture their imagination and really make them believe in you as a founder.
And to Cindy and Stephanie, what do you think is needed in the ecosystem to support more inclusive entrepreneurship? Like, what's missing in the ecosystem? Because we can talk about whether there's enough venture capital out there, whether there's enough capital out there, but there's also an ecosystem that's required. And Jennifer talked a little bit about the need to make sure that there's an interest and there's a building of networks. How do you guys think about that?
Well, I'm a little biased because I think women are overeducated, overtrained, over-mentored. Like, it's just been so much focus on trying to get women ready as opposed to addressing the people that have the power to cut the checks and make the decisions. So one of my favorite investors is Arlen Hamilton. Her policy is just like, I'm just gonna cut a bunch of $25,000 checks. You meet a minimum requirement. I'm investing in you as a founder. Your idea may change over time, but I realize your biggest constraint is capital. You don't need another mentor. I'll give you mentorship where you need it, but I'm not gonna just throw you in an accelerator and make you sort of feel like you're some remedial, what have you, because the fact of the matter is we're earning 2 out of 3 college degrees now. Like, we don't need any more training, but that's my opinion.
Right there with you.
That's good. I think it takes women sitting on the other side of the table. And so I totally agree with Stephanie that it is an imperative for women who have gotten to these outcomes that they then pay it forward by making early bets on other women. What they need is the early bet so that they can go out and trade on that for more investment for the next round and the next round. And hopefully in some way we're doing our part with that at the Pink Ceiling, because that's what we do. We make early bets on, by or for women products, mostly health tech focused. But that's a big piece of it, is really doing the money. Sonal and I had a conversation about a woman named Trish Costello, who has a company called Portfolia, and she creates portfolios of companies for accredited female investors who, to your point, to Jennifer's point, women control a lot of the wealth. And if you look at what's coming in terms of inheritances and everything else, it's great that women do so much of the give back into community and charity work, but we need to start thinking about part of what we do in the give back is growing female entrepreneurs and growing women-owned businesses. I think they can pony up the money. On mentorship, I'll say one thing. I understand we talk about it a lot. I do think that at least in the ecosystem where I am, I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, I talk a lot about female-to-female mentorship. And when you come into these co-working spaces and everything else, making sure that it is on that co-working space to get those women to another woman. And here's why. It's not that guys can't be great mentors. It's not that there's not great intention in wanting to do that. But I think that in the climate of today, there's sometimes a little bit of a holdback in candor. I can have a different conversation with a woman who walks through my door than, frankly, a lot of guys feel comfortable doing today. Whether or not they can have it is a different story, but that they feel comfortable. And it is about getting some women in who don't have truly, scalable, sustainable businesses, and being able to say to them, especially young, okay, when all of your sorority sisters buy this, then who? It's not that you're not great, but it's not a great idea. Go find the great idea. And I think that it would be very hard for somebody to say that. So in mentorship, I think what we need to foster in an ecosystem is female-to-female entrepreneurship, mentorship.
Yeah, hopefully leading to outcomes. Do you all have questions? I can keep going with questions. Got one here. Can you stand up and we'll give you a mic?
She's an MBA in sustainability management. My company is a sustainable company. It's really important to me. It's something I've focused on for about 17 years now. So my question is, when you are raising funds, I was sort of told, or maybe I read, that maybe 20% is the most you should give away of your company, that VCs don't like to see more than that. Is that true? Because I actually feel like I need more workers and want to give something away, whether it's stocks or equity, or trying to figure that out. And do you mentor, Cindy?
I do. So I'm happy to answer that question. I think that you will end up giving away more than that over the course of time. I'm totally on board with the bootstrapping it, and God bless Sarah Blakely for having done that, whether by necessity or design. So make sure, you're going to grow in circles. You're going to do your friends and family. Hopefully you have a rich uncle. I didn't. I know, bummer. So you're going to grow with that first, and you're going to give them a certain amount, and then you're going to maybe go to angels, and you're going to maybe step up to VC, and over the course of time, you're going to be giving these different shares away. It was a big give to your founder to give them, or co-founder, maybe you're treating her as 20%. But it's great to have a co-founder, because entrepreneurship is very lonely, so good for you. It'll help you through the toughest of times. But be fierce about guarding a pool for all of those who come to work for you. You should be considering that you are saving that to incentivize people with skin in the game. I would always save 30% for your pool, but imagine that you're probably going to, over time, sell off other people pieces of your business.
Questions? Wow, we got lots of them.
Sorry. Question for Cindy. And you mentioned that you went with non-VC route, and to gather big capital requirement for pharmaceutical. Would be interested for you to elaborate a little bit on that one.
Yeah. Again, I think by necessity, not by design. Although maybe having learned or been scarred by a lesson of the wrong kind of investor, started to find like-minded people. I did not have the rich uncle. I didn't have the Rolodex of these folks, but I think I made sure, as every good entrepreneur does, that anybody who would listen, I would tell my story to, and that prompted some interest who introduced me into their network and into their network and into their network. And I really grew that way. Almost through word of mouth, I ended up raising $100 million. And I think that that's what you have to do. You have to tell the stories. You can find these family offices to the point of networking. It's as easy. I won't invest in founders today unless they've demonstrated to me that they have found their network, that they are constantly learning and going out there. And it is, one Eventbrite search away for something to go to. And you will smoke people out of that because they're trolling. They're looking for the great ideas as well.
Jennifer, what do you tell entrepreneurs in your network in terms of types of funding, and similar to what Cindy just said?
So again, it really depends on the type of business. VCs are looking for quick growth and exits. So if you are looking at a company that you want to control for the duration and always be part of, that might not be the right route. If you are looking for something that's going to have hockey stick growth, and you're okay with taking on these partners who are really going to be your bedfellows for a long time, then it could be something interesting. But always look at, how fast can this company scale? How big is the market? And then thinking about what are the alternatives. There's crowdfunding now. There's equity crowdfunding, which is a new source. There's friends and family. There's family offices. There are a lot of options out there. So I think your best option is to research all of them, talk to founders who have raised with all of those kinds of funding, and figure out where might be the best fit so that you're focusing your time in the best way.
And Stephanie, one question for you. Where are you looking for funders, and where are you finding, because you said it wasn't in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, so we're primarily focused on angel investors, small funds. There are even some foundations that do social impact investing, and then some corporate venture funds. So Salesforce has a social impact fund, SAP, Microsoft, et cetera.
That's cool. Okay. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Lindsay. This has been great. I run a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. called Bite Back, and we train unemployed adults in technology and help them move into tech careers. And there are so many millions of Americans who haven't had the opportunity to go to college, who don't necessarily have resources to even buy a computer, let alone to come to South by Southwest or go to pitch competitions. And I'm wondering what strategies you've seen or ideas you might have for us to become even more inclusive, to bring in women from backgrounds that are less privileged than many of us have, so that we can really bring their incredible ideas to the world.
Jennifer, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, so when we were building Project Entrepreneur, we took inclusivity as a big piece of that into the fabric of the design. So we have community partnerships with Black Founders, Latino Startup Alliance, Venture for America, and HBCU's ICE program. Now I should note that 2 of those are related to universities, so there still is that issue there. But really it was about reaching the most diverse pool that we could. And what we see is just by getting the word out there, the pipeline is there. We're seeing 50% women of color applying to our venture competition in our classes and in our finalists. So I don't believe there's a pipeline problem. I believe that those women investors are out there, and it's really about making sure that they're aware of the resources that are available to them.
We have a question in the back there. There we go.
So my question isn't entrepreneurial at all. It's just everyday life at work question. What do you do? Do you have any advice when you find yourself on an all-male team and you feel so normal as a person but so weird with their interests being so different from yours? How do you navigate those authentic relationships that you guys mentioned? How do you do that when you stick out so much?
It's interesting because I've been working with women almost exclusively for quite a bit now, but I did used to work in very heavily male-dominated industries, and it's really about finding those commonalities. You know, maybe you both have a common hobby, maybe you both like to travel to the same place, maybe you went to the same school, it's finding those commonalities. People are people, and developing those relationships and finding the way that can make you feel comfortable, because as you get to know people, then it won't feel so much like you stick out like a sore thumb.
Stephanie, you were in coding. You were in technology. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'm like triple minority, so I'm often the only one. But yeah, very similar experience of just finding commonalities. I think we neglect to understand that men oftentimes have faced that experience of feeling like they don't belong, or that they're left out, or that they're very different. And so yeah, I think empathy is a huge part of it. Just sort of understanding that, you know, we're humans, we all have our different struggles and insecurities, but if we're working towards a common goal, let's just sort of, you know, establish mutual respect and, you know, focus on the positives.
Where's the microphone next?
Hi.
Oh, okay.
Stephanie, you mentioned the buzzword bingo in Silicon Valley, AI, Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. So one thing I've noticed is that empathy has also become part of the buzzword bingo when there's a female founder pitching. And so it's the discussion of empathy versus the outcomes of the empathy in business. So I'm wondering, what are empathetic decisions you've made in your businesses so we can actually talk about the outcomes of that type of behavior? Thank you.
Good question. I think in a lot of ways, I'm structuring my product in a way that encourages empathetic outcomes, right? So, you know, we initially started off as branding our company like diversity on purpose. We want people who are very intentional about diversity, but realize that, okay, that may cause people to be really defensive or turn people away. So how can we sort of reconfigure our branding and our product strategy so that we understand all people experience bias, and how do we, you know, sort of give people information in a way that they can make better decisions about a candidate without even knowing that they're doing it in a way that's inclusive. And so part of that is, you know, the blinding of resumes, doing what the symphonic orchestras did for blind auditions. And so I think, when I think about, you say empathetic decision-making in business, for me, it's really been like, how can I create something? What control do I have over the product that I'm putting out and I'm selling and the team that I'm building that can yield, you know, tangible results that exhibit that?
We can also think about empathy as a strength when you think about empathy for the customer. So if you are able to put yourself in your customer's place, you're going to create a stronger business and be able to grow your revenues. So thinking about how you might put that into place in the business context.
Great question in the back.
Oh, I so want to
Oh,
answer
hi. My name is Carmel. So I've spent the last 30 years working in large institutional legacy companies. And I definitely have a technical knowledge, and I have a lot of ideas where these spaces, these institutions are not meeting the needs of the general public. But I haven't grown up in the tech industry, and so I don't really know what the foundational tools are outside of the mainstream products. When I'm going into these startup, techs, they're like, well, what's driving it? Well, this is driving that, this is driving that, this is driving that. How does someone really understand the architecture of driving these broad technical business? I think that's a lot of women in my situation have these ideas, but putting these technical, foundational things in place of technically how to do it. What would you recommend?
Well, first I would say it's not as overwhelming as it seems. I think they put on the facade that it's so super complex and hard that every woman has to learn to code. It really isn't that different than running, a lot of other types of businesses. I mean, there's components of specific products. So, I worked at Microsoft for about 5.5 years, and I find myself ramping up more on understanding, the specific details of that product versus getting sort of this like base level understanding of overall tech companies. So I think if there is a specific company or industry that you're interested in, take advantage of, the online tools, the resources, the learnings, the white papers, et cetera. I'm a big fan of lynda.com, which is a female-owned company acquired by LinkedIn, where you can pretty much learn anything within a few hours if you just sit down. But my biggest advice is just jump in, feet first. It's not as overwhelming and complex as it seems.
You also don't have to be good at everything, right? You find the people who have the strength that you lack. I think if you are the founder, it's important to understand the language and know what you're looking for in those people, but you don't have to be good at everything. You don't have to run every part of the company.
Oh, right here.
Question for Stephanie. Hi. As an African American female, knowing what you know now in the course of your companies, what 3 things would you tell a female who wants to start a business and also wants to maybe leave a full-time job?
3 things. Know your target customer inside and out. Get to know them. Don't be afraid to talk about your business and pitch it. I think we oftentimes have this fear that someone's going to steal my idea or someone's just going to run with it. But the more feedback you get, the better. I think sometimes it's hard for us to take feedback in a constructive way. But it was so important for how I've gotten to where I am. The other thing is, just sort of understanding that the externalities in terms of how people respond to you and your expertise is not always you, it's them. And you need to manage that in such a way so that it doesn't affect your mental health. African American women have such an issue with mental health that goes unaddressed. And so adding, the fact that you're starting a venture, you left your company, you're not getting paid on the 1st and the 15th, that can add to it a lot. But just understand the system wasn't created for you. When I think of venture capital, I think of like Christopher Columbus, right? He had a venture capitalist that got him to this country. Like that didn't happen with black women. There's no black woman who was given money to go create a country. And so you have to, you have to navigate as though this environment was not set up for you to succeed, but you have to figure out unique resources in that regard. And sort of, I would say, to piggyback on that, I have an issue of looking at my peers and comparing them to me and my progress. So one of my classmates is Kevin Systrom, the founder of Instagram. Like literally, I'm taking final exams with this dude. Few years later, he's like, "Oh, $1 billion buyout from Facebook," and I'm like, "What am I doing with my life?" But, you know, I have to take a step back and realize, like, okay, I came from a single mother who was homeless at one point. I've never met my father. I had to bust my ass in high school to get into Stanford. I can't beat myself up because someone else who may be of similar age or similar background or education or experience is much further along. I just have to make do with what I have.
That's good. That's really good.
Cindy,
That
I
was
was gonna-
highly
can you-
tweetable, too.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Can I go back to that empathy with outcomes just really quickly, because I'm dying to answer it, lest we let it become a buzzword. So when I took on this drug, another company had put it on the shelf. And they hadn't put it on the shelf on the basis of science. Actually, the science was spectacular. We'd studied it in 11,000 women and met outcomes. They put it on the shelf on the basis of a societal narrative around female sexuality. And so here's where empathy came into play. You know, I went from a classic big pharma who turned and ran away from this category to me sitting down with women for a year and understanding what it was like to live with this condition, what the impact was on their life. And when I listened, by God, so too was the FDA going to listen. And it wasn't until we listened to patients, who should always be at the center of every conversation when we innovate, when we bring new drug categories, new drugs to market. But to their credit, they opened their doors. And when they sat there and listened to women, they then turned to the science. Everything, it sounds so perfect. Everything comes down to benefit risk, maybe in life, but certainly in scientific decisions. And that sounds very objective. It's completely subjective. If you assign no value to the benefit of something, then any risk would be too great. And so that really was, I think, the value of empathy in the equation that ultimately got to the right outcome.
And our last question.
Hi, first, my name is Michelle Lynn Warner, and I am an owner and a CEO of a company that is innovating in the wine retail space. We are leveraging the power of technology with a human connection to a wine expert who helps to hand select wines based on your taste preferences and within your budget. It's essentially very similar to like a Stitch Fix for wine, if you're familiar with that online fashion styling service. Stephanie, I just want to hug you because I feel very much, you know, in terms of your experience, similar to what I have experienced growing up, and wanted to offer really two things. One, a resource for those of you who are not necessarily interested in venture capital. I've bootstrapped my company for the last 4 years, and I'm really proud to say that we are going to be breaking $1.2 million in revenue this year. So the first resource here is a community advantage loan with a small business association. SBA does require, typically for a traditional loan, for you to have some kind of asset, but the community advantage loan does not. And you can get up to about $250,000 in capital. So go for that if you can. And then I had a question. I essentially I'm a small business that is trying to gain some growth capital because we are, I am not creating a hockey stick here. It exists for what we're trying to do. And so if you guys have some advice in terms of how to change that narrative, because we have built tech, but we're still kind of looked at in some ways as this small business with a brick and mortar presence, and breaking that narrative has been somewhat challenging in terms of turning people's attention to what the potential is of what we're doing at Decanter. Thank you.
If you can articulate your big vision in a really succinct but inspiring way. I'll use Rent the Runway as an example. They started with renting dresses, but now they're the closet in the cloud. So if you can come up with where is it that you want to be and really use that as your North Star.
Okay, last question for me, and this is just fast. One bit of advice you'd tell everybody that's starting to start a business right now. You want to start, Cindy?
First. Well, this room, I'm going to go back to prepare to be underestimated and then kill them with competence.
2,
go for it.
Find a cheap, scrappy, low-tech way to test to make sure you have a real there before you spend money, your own or other people's. And think big. Be very bold with your ideas.
Know your numbers, know your customer in and out like you live and breathe it every day.
Look, we're here, we're going to change the world, but it's going to take all of us to want to believe in ourselves to do it and not doubt when others put doubt in us. So I think from this panel, at least what I take away is we all have unconscious biases in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes we do it to ourselves. And if we want to build these businesses, the problems are out there to be solved. And we just need to believe that we can solve them. So thank you all, and thank you for this incredible panel.